Welcome back to the deep dive. I'm so incredibly glad you are here with us today because we're looking at something that honestly feels like it explains the invisible water we've all been swimming in.
It really does. It's pervasive.
Yeah, and I want you to imagine something for a second. Think about the state of the world right now. We have billions of people waking up every single morning, commuting to jobs they often actively dislike.
Right.
We have people drowning in debts
Yeah.
that, mathematically speaking, can never actually be repaid in full.
Mm.
We are watching the natural world fundamentally degrade, and there is this rising, palpable anxiety that so many of us feel in our bodies every day.
Mm-hmm.
And given all of that pressure, all of that friction,
Yeah.
why aren't people rioting in the streets? Like, why do we just keep waking up, scrolling, buying, voting for the exact same choices, and keeping the whole machine, what our source material calls the engine, running?
It is the defining paradox of our time. And to understand it, we really have to step entirely outside of traditional economics or political theory. What we're really talking about today is the psychological architecture of modern society.
Yes.
We're looking at how human reality is constructed to maintain a very specific status quo.
Exactly. And we are pulling from an excerpt of Geplecte text, specifically Chapter 5, which is called The Screen on the Dashboard. And our mission for this deep dive is to map out that psychological architecture.
Which is quite an undertaking.
It is. The central argument here is that the reason we don't revolt, the reason we don't look directly at the engine running our lives, is because of the screen. And when we say the screen, we aren't just talking about your smartphone or your television, though. I mean, those are definitely part of it.
Right. The screen is much broader than a physical device. It is an all-encompassing filter. It's the entire comprehensive system that shapes how you perceive reality itself.
So it's everything.
Pretty much. It includes the news media, the education system, the advertising industry, the entertainment you consume, and even the very vocabulary you use to think. Its primary systemic function is to keep your eyes fixed safely on the dashboard.
Wow.
It provides just enough feedback, just enough distraction, and just enough friction to ensure you never pop the hood and look at the engine itself.
Okay, let's unpack this.
Yeah.
Because if this massive invisible screen is filtering our reality, someone had to build the foundation for it, right?
Yeah.
Where did this start? Because I highly doubt this is all just some, accident of history.
Yo, it definitely wasn't an accident. To find the blueprint, you actually have to go back about a century to a man named Edward Bernays.
Bernays.
Right. He is arguably the most influential person of the 20th century that most people have never heard of. Bernays was actually Sigmund Freud's nephew.
Wait, Freud, like the psychoanalysis.
The very same. And while Freud was busy pioneering psychoanalysis, mapping out the dark, hidden, irrational depths of the human unconscious, Bernays was taking notes. But where Freud saw a medical breakthrough, Bernays saw a highly lucrative business model.
Wait, so he essentially took his uncle's theories about repressed desires and turned them into a corporate strategy.
He did exactly that. Bernays realized that if you understand the unconscious mind, you can weaponize it, or, as he probably would have preferred to say, optimize it. He took psychoanalysis, stripped it of its clinical purpose, and used it to create an industry he famously branded public relations.
Public relations. So he invented PR.
He did. And his foundational insight was a pretty devastating critique of human nature. He said humans do not make decisions based on logic.
Which is a really tough pill to swallow. I think everyone listening right now likes to imagine they're a highly rational person. You weigh the pros and cons, you look at the data, you make a choice. But Bernays is saying, no, that's just the story you tell yourself after the fact.
Precisely. Bernays recognized that our choices are actually driven by deep-seated emotions, unconscious desires, and powerful symbols. And once you figure that out, you can engineer behavior on a massive scale.
You just bypass the logic entirely.
Exactly. You can guide entire populations to buy a product, support a war, or adopt a completely new lifestyle without them ever realizing they're being steered.
But how did he justify that? Because manipulating the unconscious desires of an entire population feels completely antithetical to the idea of a free democratic society. Did he just not care?
That is the most striking part of his legacy. He didn't hide this at all, and he didn't feel guilty about it. He wrote books about it openly. Bernays genuinely believed that the masses were fundamentally irrational and dangerous.
So he thought he was doing us a favor.
Yes. In his mind, leaving society up to the logical reasoning of the average citizen was a recipe for chaos. He viewed the engineering of public consent as a necessary stabilizing tool. To him, manipulating your desires wasn't sinister. It was the only way to keep a democracy functioning smoothly.
It's wild to think about that kind of paternalistic arrogance. He thought he was the good guy pulling the strings. And you can see his fingerprints on literally every advertisement
Oh.
today.
Everywhere.
Like when you see a car commercial, they are never just giving you the technical specs. They aren't selling the gas mileage. They are selling you the feeling of untethered freedom or rugged dominance or keeping your family perfectly safe from a dangerous world. They bypass your prefrontal cortex entirely and speak directly to your unconscious.
What's fascinating here is how that baseline of emotional manipulation didn't just stay in advertising. It evolved into a method of structural control, particularly in our information and news systems.
Right.
Advertising manages what you desire, but the media manages what you believe is possible. And that brings us to the concepts developed by Noam Chomsky and Edward Herman.
Yes, manufacturing consent. Now, whenever we start talking about media control, I think it's really easy for the mind to instantly jump to conspiracy theories. We imagine a smoke-filled room with 5 billionaires sitting around a mahogany table, actively crossing out headlines and deciding what the peasants are allowed to know today.
It's a tempting image because it gives us a clear villain. But the reality Chomsky and Herman mapped out is entirely structural, which actually makes it far more pervasive and much harder to fight.
So no smoke-filled room.
No smoke-filled room. Instead, corporate media passes information through a series of automatic filters before it ever reaches the public.
Right, it's not a guy with a red pen. It's the economic reality of the system itself.
Yeah.
What are these filters actually doing in practice?
Think of it like a water purification system, but instead of removing toxins, it removes systemic threats. The filters include the massive corporate ownership of media conglomerates, the reliance on advertising revenue to keep the lights on.
Because advertisers won't pay for content that attacks their interests.
Exactly. Then there's the symbiotic relationship with government and corporate PR departments for daily sourcing. And finally, the fear of organized pushback, which they call FLEC. Because these filters operate completely automatically, they systematically weed out any narrative that fundamentally challenges the power structures of the engine.
So you don't need a dictator censoring the press. You just build a system where the only journalists who get hired, promoted, and given a massive national platform are the ones who already, genuinely, think within the acceptable boundaries.
That's the brilliance of it. It creates an invisible boundary line around public discourse. Political scientists call this the Overton window, which is the narrow range of ideas tolerated in public discourse.
And the screen presents that window as everything there is.
Yes. The screen presents this window as the entire universe of reasonable thought. You can have furious, passionate debates, but only inside that window. Anything outside of it isn't debated. It is simply framed as radical, absurd, or completely unserious.
That makes so much sense. You watch a political panel show and people are screaming at each other, so it feels like a robust free speech environment. But they are arguing over a 3% tax shift, while the idea of redesigning the entire economic system isn't even allowed on the stage.
Precisely.
The screen maintains the boundaries so perfectly that questioning the engine itself is just never brought to the table.
And this structural filtering relies heavily on perhaps the most invisible, inescapable layer of the screen, which is the language we use.
This part of the deep dive really got to me. It immediately made me think of George Orwell's 1984, which honestly feels more relevant now than when it was written. In that novel, the regime introduces newspeak, where they literally just delete words from the dictionary.
Right, to restrict thought.
The logic is terrifyingly simple.
Yeah.
If you eliminate the vocabulary for rebellion or freedom or critical thought, it becomes neurologically impossible for people to even conceive of those ideas. You can't stage a revolution if you literally don't have the words to think about it.
Orwell's Newspeak was a brilliant piece of fiction, but the mechanism he was describing is grounded in very real cognitive science. George Lakoff's work illustrates this perfectly. Lakoff spent his career proving that the linguistic frames we are given to discuss politics, economics, and daily life are never neutral.
They're loaded.
Every single term we use carries built-in, unconscious assumptions.
Like when politicians use the phrase tax relief. The word relief automatically frames taxation as an affliction, a burden, or a disease that you need to be cured of. If you accept the phrase tax relief, you've already lost the argument that taxes might be a civic investment before the debate even starts.
That is a perfect example. If you are forced to build your worldview using only the vocabulary that the system designed, you will inevitably arrive at the conclusions the system permits. You are building a house, but your only tool is a corporate-sponsored hammer.
That's a great way to put it.
And this brings us to a concept from philosopher Miranda Fricker that is absolutely vital to understanding the psychological toll of the screen. It's called hermeneutical injustice.
It sounds incredibly academic, but the actual reality of it is heartbreaking. How does hermeneutical injustice actually play out in someone's day-to-day life?
Hermeneutical injustice occurs when a group of people is systematically deprived of the concepts and the vocabulary they need to understand and articulate their own lived experiences. It usually happens to people experiencing exploitation or marginalization.
So they don't have the words for their own pain.
Exactly. Without the right words to describe the systemic nature of what is happening to them, they are left deeply confused, inarticulate, and vulnerable.
You feel it in your bones, but you can't say it. Imagine someone working 3 gig economy jobs. They are exhausted, their relationships are falling apart, they can't make rent, and they feel this immense crushing weight pressing down on them every single day.
Mm-hmm.
They know something is fundamentally wrong.
Hmm.
But if the screen only gives them words like hustle culture, time management, and personal responsibility, they have no way to articulate that they are being systemically extracted for profit.
Mm-hmm.
You feel the weight of the engine, but you have no words for it.
That is the exact tragedy of it. It takes a massive architectural failure of society and internalizes it as a personal psychological failure. The individual thinks, I must just be lazy, or I must not be grinding hard enough. They blame themselves because the vocabulary of systemic exploitation simply isn't available to them.
And if you don't have the words, you can't explain it to your coworker. You can't share the experience. No words means no shared understanding. And without shared understanding, there's absolutely zero chance of collective action.
None.
You are entirely caged by the limits of the language provided to you. It isolates you completely.
It does. But as restrictive as that linguistic cage is, it was only the first iteration of the screen. The architecture didn't stop at filtering news and language. It evolved to filter reality itself.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because we cross a line from manipulation into something almost sci-fi. We have to talk about Guy Debord and his warnings from 1967 about the spectacle. He argued that authentic, lived human experience was being rapidly replaced by representations of life. We stopped living and started performing.
And Jean Baudrillard pushed that idea to its absolute limit with his concept of hyperreality. Baudrillard observed that we had crossed a critical threshold. The representations of reality on the screen, the images, the symbols, the media narratives, had actually become more real and more meaningful to the average person than the physical, tangible reality they were supposed to represent.
The map didn't just replace the territory. The map became the only thing we cared about.
Yes.
The example used to explain this is so jarring, but you can't deny it. Think about your own life.
Yeah.
You probably know highly intimate details about the lives of massive celebrities.
Yeah.
You know what they eat, who they are dating, their childhood traumas. These are people you have never met and will mathematically never meet.
Right.
But you likely don't know the last name of the person living 50 feet away from you in your own neighborhood. The hyperreality on the screen commands more of your emotional bandwidth than your physical community.
It's a profound misallocation of human connection. And we see it everywhere. Think about the modern vacation. For many people, the physical experience of traveling, seeing a beautiful sunset, or eating a meal is entirely secondary to capturing the representation of that moment for social media.
Picture it didn't happen.
Exactly. If the photo isn't posted to the screen, it's almost as if the lived experience didn't happen. We feel profound, genuine grief when a fictional character on a television show dies, but we feel numb and detached when we see actual physical ecosystems being bulldozed in our own towns.
Our emotional compass has been completely hijacked by the spectacle. But Debord and Baudrillard were writing in the era of television and mass media. Television was a one-way street. It just broadcasted the hyperreality at you. But then the internet came along, and the internet is fundamentally different.
Yes, the internet changed the paradigm completely because the modern screen looks back at you. This brings us to the forensic analysis of Shoshana Zuboff and her work on surveillance capitalism.
Zuboff's work is honestly chilling. Because for a long time, the old internet adage was, if the product is free, you are the product. But Zuboff says that's actually too generous. You aren't the product. You are the raw material.
That is the vital distinction. Every single time you click a link, every time you pause scrolling for half a second to look at an image, every search query, every GPS location ping, it is all being meticulously harvested. Your life experience is being rendered into behavioral data.
Just vacuumed up.
And that data isn't just used to target you with an ad for a new pair of sneakers. It is fed into massive, opaque, algorithmic prediction machines.
And the goal of those prediction machines is what? To just figure out what I want before I want it.
It goes deeper than anticipating your desires. The goal is to actively modify your future behavior. Your attention, your unconscious emotional triggers, your political leanings, your very sense of identity. These are being modeled, predicted, and sold to the highest bidder, whether that's a corporate advertiser or a political operative.
It's steering you.
The architecture uses your own data to subtly nudge your actions in ways that are highly profitable for the engine. The screen doesn't just show you a movie anymore. It rewrites your neural pathways while you watch it.
It's a closed-loop system of behavioral modification. It feeds you outrage to keep you clicking, harvests the data of your outrage, and then uses that data to figure out exactly how to make you even more outraged tomorrow. Which perfectly transitions into the final and arguably the most powerful mechanism of the screen that we need to discuss, the ultimate distraction.
The political polarization, the left versus right divide. Now, looking at this purely as a structural mechanic, we aren't evaluating the morality of either side's policies. We are simply analyzing how this intense, seemingly inescapable cultural division functions within the architecture of the screen.
Right, maintaining total neutrality on the politics themselves. What's fascinating is the argument that this furious culture war is not a glitch. We tend to look at how angry everyone is and think the system is broken. But from the perspective of the engine, the system is running at peak efficiency.
It really is.
The culture war isn't a distraction from the real fight. To the system, it is the real fight.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the utility of this polarization becomes undeniable. Consider the massive underlying pressures we discussed at the beginning of the show, the debt, the exhausting labor, the ecological decline. That creates a tremendous amount of kinetic, frustrated energy in a population.
A lot of anger.
A lot of anger. And if that energy is directed vertically at the power structures, the engine is in trouble. But if you can capture that energy and direct it laterally...
Or keep the passengers screaming at each other. It's like we are all trapped on a bus that is careening off a cliff and we are completely out of gas. But instead of looking out the window or checking the engine, we are engaged in a blood sport battle over who gets to sit in the driver's seat.
That's a great analogy.
As long as your entire identity, your tribal loyalty, and your sense of moral righteousness are tied up in defeating the passengers on the other side of the aisle, you are never going to look down at the mechanics of the bus itself.
It is the ultimate sleight of hand. The algorithmic screen specifically incentivizes and amplifies the most extreme voices on both sides because outrage drives the highest behavioral engagement. It is a highly efficient, self-regulating pressure valve. It keeps the population endlessly occupied with each other.
Wow.
And the most crucial thing to understand about this entire architecture, the PR manipulation, the media filters, the language cages, the surveillance capitalism, and the political theater, is that nobody is truly at the wheel.
Wait, what do you mean nobody is at the wheel? If there's no smoke-filled room, how does this all stay perfectly aligned?
It is an emergent system. It is a complex web of legal, financial, media, and psychological incentives that have been built up iteratively over centuries. It perpetuates itself simply because it is unimaginably profitable for a tiny fraction of people at the top, and it has become invisibly deeply habitual for the rest of us. The machine just runs its programming.
So what does this all mean? We have just walked through a gauntlet of matrix-level reality-bending concepts. We've talked about PR hacking your unconscious mind, structural filters limiting what you can know, language literally caging your thoughts, algorithms modifying your behavior, and political theater turning us against each other to protect the engine. If you are listening to this and feeling a sense of overwhelming dread, that is a completely rational response.
It is heavy, but this is where we need to emphasize something incredibly important. You are not foolish for having been shaped by this architecture. No one escapes it entirely because it is the environment we are born into. It is the cultural air we breathe.
Yes,
Blaming yourself for being influenced by a trillion-dollar infrastructure designed to capture your attention is exactly the kind of hermeneutical injustice we discussed earlier.
Exactly. Give yourself a lot of grace here. You are operating inside a machine designed over decades by the smartest engineers, psychologists, and marketers on Earth, all working to keep you engaged, distracted, and producing. But here is the light at the end of the tunnel. Architectures, no matter how entrenched or sophisticated, can be redesigned. Habits can be broken. The moment you see the screen for what it actually is, its power over your unconscious begins to fracture.
Awareness disrupts the automatic nature of the filters. Now that we have the vocabulary, words like manufactured consent, hyperreality, and surveillance capitalism, we can begin to build that shared understanding that was previously denied to us. We can start pointing at the screen and naming the mechanisms.
And building that shared understanding is exactly what we are going to keep doing, because the
Yes.
journey doesn't stop here. The next chapter of this deep dive shifts gears in a major way. Today, we looked at society from a macro, abstract level. Next time, we are diving into what living inside this highly filtered, algorithmic machine does directly to your physical body, your personal psychology, and your individual search for meaning. It is going to get incredibly personal.
This raises an important question, however. A final thought to leave you pondering, building on everything we've uncovered today. Up until now, the screen, the PR, the language framing, the media filters, even the algorithms has been designed and directed by humans.
Right.
But what happens to our shared reality when artificial intelligence, a fundamentally non-human entity, begins generating the vast majority of the language, the images, the outrage, and the hyper-reality we consume? If the screen is fully handed over to AI, does the architecture finally become entirely, inescapably self-perpetuating with no human at the wheel at all?
Wow. An entirely artificially generated hyper-reality that is deeply unsettling and exactly the kind of question we need to be asking. We're going to leave you to chew on that one. Thank you so much for spending your time with us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the language you are given, pay very close attention to where your emotional energy is being directed, and most importantly, keep questioning the screen. We'll see you next time.